There are two kinds of people in every room you have ever entered: those who command silence when they speak, and those who speak louder hoping someone will finally listen. One holds the room without effort, the other exhausts themselves trying to hold attention for even a moment. The difference between them is not talent, it is not intelligence, it is not even confidence. It is something far more precise, far more dangerous. One of them understands ego. The other is enslaved by it. Machiavelli saw this divide 500 years ago. He mapped it in detail. He named the mechanics behind every collapse of power he ever witnessed, and at the center of every single one, a fragile ego that someone knew exactly how to dismantle. You have watched it happen. You have felt it happen to you. And by the end of this, you will understand exactly how it works, and why knowing these 7 methods changes the way you move through every room you enter. Before you can destroy something, you have to understand what it is made of. Most people think ego is arrogance. They picture the loud one at the table, the one who interrupts, the one who needs every story to circle back to them. But that is only the surface. Ego in its truest form is the story a person tells themselves about who they are. It is the internal narrative that says, I am important, I am respected, I matter. And here is what makes it so fragile. That story depends entirely on external confirmation. Every day, without realizing it, people scan their environment for proof that their self-image is accurate. A compliment confirms it, a laugh at their joke reinforces it, a nod of agreement keeps the whole structure standing. But remove that confirmation, even briefly, and the architecture begins to crack. Machiavelli understood this deeply. In The Prince, he did not write about swords and armies alone. He wrote about perception, about the invisible scaffolding that holds a person's authority in place. He understood that power is not taken by force. It is taken by removing the supports that hold someone's self-image together. And once those supports collapse, the person collapses with them. This is not cruelty for its own sake. This is mechanics. The same way an engineer studies a bridge to understand where it bears weight and where it does not. Machiavelli studied human ego to understand where it holds and where it breaks. The 7 methods you are about to learn are not theories. They are pressure points. Each one targets a specific load-bearing pillar of someone's self-concept. And when you understand them, you will see them everywhere. In negotiations, in relationships, in the subtle warfare of social dynamics that most people never notice. Every conflict you have ever witnessed, every betrayal, every manipulation, every desperate grab for control traces back to one thing: a threatened ego. Not money, not territory, not even love. Ego. When a person feels their self-image under attack, they do not respond rationally. They respond with the urgency of someone whose survival is at stake. Because psychologically it is. Neuroscience has shown that social rejection and identity threats activate the same brain regions as physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex fires in both cases. Your brain literally cannot tell the difference between a bruised ego and a broken bone. This is why people do irrational things when their ego is threatened. They lash out at people who love them. They sabotage opportunities that would benefit them. They choose destruction over the simple act of admitting they were wrong. Machiavelli saw this pattern repeat across every court in Renaissance Italy. He watched brilliant men destroy themselves, not because they lacked strategy, but because their ego could not absorb a wound. Cesare Borgia conquered half of Italy with ruthless precision. But when his father, Pope Alexander VI, died unexpectedly, Borgia's ego could not accept the sudden loss of status. He made alliance after alliance based on who flattered him rather than who served his interests. Within months, the man who had held half a peninsula crumbled, not from military defeat, but from ego collapse. Think of ego like a dam holding back a river. When the dam is intact, the person appears composed, powerful, in control. But every dam has weak points. And when you know where those weak points are, you do not need to bring an army. You need a single, well-placed crack. The 7 methods that follow are those cracks. Each one exploits a different vulnerability in the ego's structure. Some work through withdrawal, some through precision, some through patience. But all of them share one principle. They force the other person to confront the gap between who they believe they are and who they actually are. and that gap is where all power shifts begin. Tell me in the comments, which gap between self-image and reality have you watched destroy someone's composure? Name the moment. You will recognize it the second you start writing. Subscribe if you want to keep going. The 7 methods start now. The first method is the one most people misunderstand. Silence. Not the silence of having nothing to say, the silence of choosing not to say it. When someone expects your reaction and receives nothing, no anger, no agreement, no acknowledgement, their ego enters a freefall. You have felt this yourself. You send a message you care about. Hours pass, then a day, no response. And in that silence, your mind begins to spiral. What did I do wrong? Are they upset? Do they not care? That spiral is not accidental. It is the ego searching desperately for the external confirmation it needs to stay intact. Strategic silence removes that confirmation entirely. Machiavelli observed that the most powerful figures in any court were not the ones who spoke the most. They were the ones who spoke the least, and chose their moments with surgical precision. When you are silent in a moment where speech is expected, you force the other person to fill the void. And what they fill it with reveals everything: their insecurities, their assumptions, their need for your approval. You do not have to say a word. Your silence does the work. The person on the receiving end begins to project meaning onto your absence. They assume anger, they assume judgment, they assume you know something they do not. And every assumption weakens their position while strengthening yours. This is not passive. This is the most active form of control available to you. You are choosing the one response no one can argue with, no one can counter, and no one can ignore. Silence is the first crack in the dam. The second method targets something even more vulnerable than attention. It targets pride. Every person carries a mental list of accomplishments they believe define them: the promotion they earned, the skill they mastered, the moment they believe proved their worth. When someone presents one of these achievements to you and you respond with genuine indifference, the effect is devastating. Not hostility, not criticism, just the quiet absence of being impressed. Imagine someone tells you about a deal they closed, a record they broke, a recognition they received, and your response is a calm nod, maybe a brief acknowledgement. Then you change the subject. You have not insulted them, you have not attacked them, but you have done something far worse. You have communicated that what they consider their greatest proof of value did not register as significant to you. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote about the danger of depending on the opinions of others. A person whose identity rests on their achievements is controlled by anyone who can withhold admiration. And when admiration is withheld, not cruelly but casually, the ego begins to question its own foundation. They will not show it immediately, but internally, a storm begins. Why were they not impressed? Is my achievement not as significant as I thought? What do they have that makes them so unmoved? That internal questioning is the second crack. The third method does not require you to say or do anything to the other person directly. It only requires you to remain calm when they cannot. There is nothing more destabilizing to a reactive person than someone who refuses to react. When tension rises in an argument, a negotiation, a public confrontation, most people match the energy. Voices get louder, gestures get sharper, emotions escalate. But when you remain perfectly still, your voice steady, your posture relaxed, your breathing even, you create a mirror that forces the other person to see their own loss of control. And that reflection is ego poison. Machiavelli noted that the leaders who maintained composure during crisis were the ones who accumulated the most loyalty. Not because composure is admirable in the abstract, but because composure in the face of chaos communicates a message that cannot be faked. I am not threatened by this. And if I am not threatened, then I am operating from a position you have not reached. The person who loses their composure in your presence has already lost the exchange. They know it, you know it, and everyone watching knows it. Your calm becomes a statement about the hierarchy between you. Not a word needs to be spoken. The contrast itself does the damage. This is the third crack, and it is one of the most visible. Because unlike silence or indifference, superior calm plays out in real time, in front of witnesses. And few things collapse an ego faster than a public display of someone else's unshakable composure next to your own visible unraveling. The fourth method is subtle, almost invisible, and precisely because of that, it cuts deeper than any of the others. Selective memory. You remember their name, but not the story they told you last week. You remember the meeting, but not the point they made. You acknowledge their presence, but forget the detail they considered most important. This is not rudeness, it is calibrated forgetting. When a person realizes that the thing they said, the thing they believed was memorable, significant, worthy of being retained, simply did not register in your mind, their ego absorbs a wound that has no visible source. They cannot accuse you of anything. You did not insult them. You did not dismiss them. You simply forgot. And that is worse, because it communicates something insults never can. You were not important enough to remember. Machiavelli understood that perceived significance is the currency of social power. People do not fear being hated. They fear being irrelevant. Hatred confirms that you matter. Irrelevance confirms that you do not. When you selectively forget the details someone considers central to their identity, you are communicating irrelevance without ever saying the word. The ego cannot defend against this. There is no argument to make. There is no insult to return. There is only the quiet, corrosive realization that they did not leave a mark. This is the fourth crack. And it is the one that keeps working long after the moment has passed. The fifth method introduces a third party, and that is what makes it so effective. Praising someone's rival, casually, specifically, and in their presence, triggers a cascade of ego responses that no direct attack could achieve. When you compliment a competitor's work, acknowledge their skill, or express genuine admiration for someone who occupies the same space, the person listening does not hear a compliment about someone else. They hear a comparison, and in that comparison, they come up short. This works because ego is not absolute, it is relative. People do not measure themselves against an abstract standard. They measure themselves against the people closest to them in status, skill, or ambition. Machiavelli observed this in the courts of Florence and Rome. The most effective way to destabilize a rival was never to attack them directly. It was to elevate someone else in their presence, to let the comparison do the work. When you praise their rival, you are not insulting the person in front of you. You are simply shining light in a direction that leaves them in shadow. And shadows are where ego begins to rot. The person will smile, they will nod, they may even agree with your praise. But inside, a calculation is running. Why did they mention them? Do they think they are better than me? What do they have that I do not? Those questions are the fifth crack, and they are self-generating. Once planted, they grow without any further effort from you. The sixth method requires time. It is not a single moment, it is a sequence. First you give, then you take away. You offer consistent approval, attention, validation. You become a reliable source of confirmation for their self-image. They come to expect it, they come to depend on it, and then, without explanation, you withdraw. If this reframe has shifted something in how you see these dynamics, a like puts it in front of someone else who needs to see it right now. This is the most psychologically devastating method on this list, because it does not just deny validation, it removes validation that was already given, and losing something you once had hurts far more than never having it at all. Psychologists call this loss aversion. The pain of losing a resource is roughly twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining it. When you withdraw approval someone once relied on, you are not just creating absence, you are creating loss. Machiavelli practiced this principle in his political counsel. He advised leaders to be generous at first, to build dependence, and then to become selective, not to punish, but to remind others that what they received was never guaranteed. The person who loses your approval will not simply move on. They will chase it. They will modify their behavior. They will try to figure out what changed, what they did wrong, what they need to do differently. And in that chase, they have already surrendered their power. This is the sixth crack. And unlike the others, it compounds over time. Every day without the approval they once had is another day the ego weakens. The seventh method is the quietest, the slowest, and the most permanent. It requires no interaction at all. You simply build a life that does not include them, a life that is visibly full, visibly purposeful, visibly thriving, and visibly indifferent to their existence. This is not revenge, it is architecture. When someone who once held significance in your life sees that you have moved forward, that you are growing, succeeding, connecting with others, without any visible need for them, their ego absorbs a wound that never fully heals. Because the message is not, "I am angry at you." The message is, "I do not think about you at all." And that is the one message the ego cannot survive. Machiavelli wrote that the best way to diminish an enemy is not to fight them. It is to render them irrelevant, to build something so complete that their absence is not even noticed. When you live well without someone, you're not attacking their ego. You're simply building a world where their ego has no role, no function, no audience, and an ego without an audience collapses under its own weight. This is the seventh and final crack. It does not require your presence. It does not require your words. It does not even require your awareness. It only requires that you keep building. You have now seen 7 pressure points, 7 places where the structure of ego is thinnest. But understanding them is not the same as using them recklessly. Machiavelli was not a sadist. He was a realist. He studied power not because he enjoyed destruction, but because he understood that ignorance of these dynamics does not protect you from them. It only guarantees that you will be the one destroyed. Every one of these methods has been used on you at some point in your life. Someone went silent when you needed their response. Someone was indifferent to something you were proud of. Someone praised the person you most feared being compared to. Someone withdrew the approval you had come to depend on. And you felt it. You felt the crack. You felt your self-image shift under the weight of what was missing. The difference now is that you understand the mechanics. You can see the structure. You can recognize when these methods are being applied to you, and you can choose how to respond. That recognition is the real power here. Not the ability to destroy someone else's ego. The ability to see when yours is being targeted and to remain standing. The first practice is the simplest and the most difficult. Learn to notice your own ego reactions before you act on them. When someone ignores you and you feel the pull to chase their attention, pause. That pull is your ego seeking confirmation. It is not a rational response, it is a reflex, and reflexes can be observed without being obeyed. Begin keeping a private record, not a journal about your feelings, a log of your ego triggers. Write the moment. Write what happened. Write what your first impulse was, and then write what you chose to do instead. Over time, you will see patterns. Specific people trigger specific responses. Specific situations activate specific insecurities. And once you see the pattern loses its power over you. This is the foundation. Without it, everything else is theory. The second practice is restraint, not as suppression, but as choice. The next time you feel the urge to respond immediately, to defend yourself, to prove a point, to correct someone's perception of you, wait. Not forever. Just long enough to ask one question. Does responding serve my position, or does it serve my ego? If the answer is ego, stay silent. Let the moment pass. Watch what happens when you do not fill the space. You will discover something remarkable. Most situations that feel urgent are not. Most provocations that feel personal are not. And most responses that feel necessary are not. Restraint is not weakness. It is the refusal to be controlled by someone else's timing. When you choose when to speak and when to remain still, you reclaim the most fundamental form of power, the power over your own reactions. Machiavelli's greatest insight was not about other people. It was about the self. The person who cannot govern their own impulses will never govern anything else. Practice restraint not as a tactic against others, but as a discipline within yourself. The ability to sit with discomfort without reacting is the single most dangerous skill you can develop. The third practice is the one that outlasts all the others. Build something that does not depend on anyone else's opinion of you. A skill, a body of work, a way of living that generates its own meaning, something that exists whether or not anyone is watching, applauding, or acknowledging it. This is the practice that makes you immune to every method on this list. When your sense of self is rooted in what you build rather than what others reflect back to you, silence cannot destabilize you. Indifference cannot wound you. Withdrawn approval cannot collapse you, because your foundation is internal. Machiavelli admired leaders who derived their authority from competence rather than popularity. He called it virtue, not virtue in the moral sense, but the quality of being genuinely capable regardless of circumstance. When you build beyond the ego, you stop needing the game entirely. You can recognize it, you can navigate it, but you are no longer trapped inside it, and that is the position of true power. Not the power to destroy someone else's ego, the power to have built something in yourself that no one else can touch. You began this with a comparison. Two kinds of people, the one who commands silence and the one who begs to be heard. Now you understand what separates them. It was never volume, never aggression, never even intelligence. It was awareness. Awareness of how ego works, in others and in themselves. The person who commands the room is not the one without ego. It is the one who has studied their own ego so carefully that it no longer controls them. They can sit in silence because they do not need the noise. They can witness someone else's achievement without feeling diminished. They can absorb provocation without losing composure, not because they are cold, but because they have built something inside themselves that does not require external scaffolding to stand. That is the Machiavellian truth that most people miss. The dark laws are not about what you do to others. They are about what you refuse to let others do to you. Every method you learn today is a mirror. It shows you where ego is thin, where it cracks, where it collapses. And once you see those fracture lines clearly, in yourself first and then in the world around you, you stop being a player in the game. You become the one who sees the board. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep can fix. It is the fatigue of performing, of maintaining an image, of carrying the weight of how you believe others must see you in order for your life to feel valid. Most people have been carrying this weight so long they have forgotten it is not part of their body. They mistake the armor for skin. They mistake the performance for personality. They mistake the hunger for approval for the natural state of being alive. But it is not natural. It is learned. And what is learned can be unlearned. The 7 methods you have studied today are not weapons to stockpile. They are diagnostic instruments. Each one reveals a specific point where ego has replaced identity, where the constructed self has overwritten the actual self. Silence reveals who needs noise to feel real. Indifference reveals who needs reaction to feel significant. Competence without announcement reveals who needs applause to feel worthy. These are not attacks, they are exposures, and the most important person they can expose is you. Because here is what Machiavelli understood that his critics never grasped. The prince who cannot govern himself will never govern anything. The strategist who cannot see his own blind spots will be destroyed by them long before any enemy finds them. The ego is not your enemy. It is your early warning system. When it flares, when you feel the heat of jealousy, the sting of being overlooked, the desperate need to prove yourself, it is telling you exactly where your foundation is weak. And weak foundations can be rebuilt, but only if you are willing to look at them honestly. The first practice is the simplest and the most difficult. When you feel the urge to react, to defend, to explain, to prove, pause. Do not act on the impulse. Instead, ask yourself one question. What am I protecting right now? Not what am I responding to? What am I protecting? Because every reactive impulse is a defense mechanism. It is the ego sensing a threat to its structure. And when you name the thing being protected, your image, your status, your need to be right, you have already separated yourself from it. You are no longer the ego. You are the one observing the ego. And from that position you can choose. This is not suppression. Suppression is pushing the feeling down and pretending it does not exist. This is awareness. You feel the impulse fully. You simply do not obey it. Machiavelli wrote that the wise prince acts by choice, never by compulsion. This is what he meant. Not that you eliminate emotion, but that emotion stops eliminating your judgment. Practice this once a day, one moment where you feel the pull to react, and you choose stillness instead. Not silence as a weapon against someone else, silence as a gift to yourself, the gift of choosing rather than being chosen for. Within a week, you will begin to notice something. The situations that once destabilized you will start to feel smaller, not because they changed, because you did. The second practice targets the deepest root of ego vulnerability. the need for recognition. Choose one area of your life where you are building something meaningful, your work, a skill, a relationship, a project. And for 30 days, do not announce your progress to anyone. Do not post about it. Do not hint at it in conversation. Do not wait for someone to notice and ask. Simply build, in silence, for yourself. This will be uncomfortable. The ego will scream for acknowledgement. It will manufacture reasons why sharing is necessary. Networking, accountability, inspiration. And some of those reasons will sound perfectly rational. But underneath every one of them is the same hunger, the hunger to be seen, the hunger for external confirmation that what you are doing matters. When you build without announcing, you train yourself to derive value from the work itself, not from the applause, not from the metrics, not from the comparison. You learn what it feels like to be enough without witnesses. And that feeling, that quiet, unshakable sense of sufficiency, is the one thing that makes every ego destruction tactic powerless against you. Because you are no longer performing for an audience. You are living for yourself. Machiavelli observed that the leaders who lasted were never the loudest. They were the ones who built quietly while others postured. The ones whose results spoke so clearly that no announcement was necessary. You do not need to become invisible. You need to become someone whose visibility is a byproduct of substance, not a substitute for it. The third practice is the one most people will avoid, and that avoidance is precisely why it matters. Identify the specific ego trigger that controls you most, the one that makes your chest tighten, the one that keeps you awake replaying conversations, the one that makes you shrink or rage or withdraw. Maybe it is being corrected publicly. Maybe it is watching someone succeed in the area where you feel inadequate. Maybe it is the silence of someone whose approval you desperately want. Name it, write it down, and then deliberately and carefully expose yourself to it, not recklessly, not to punish yourself, but to practice sitting inside the discomfort without letting it dictate your behavior. If public correction destabilizes you, ask a trusted person to challenge your ideas openly. Sit with the sensation, feel the ego flare, and choose not to defend. If comparison destroys you, spend time studying the work of someone who excels where you struggle. Feel the envy. Notice the shrinking, and stay. This is exposure therapy for the ego. And it works the same way all exposure therapy works, by teaching your nervous system that the thing it fears will not actually destroy you. Every time you survive the trigger without being consumed by it, your foundation strengthens. The fracture line heals. The ego loses its grip, not because you killed it, but because you proved to yourself that you can exist without its protection. Machiavelli wrote that fortune favors the bold. But true boldness is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to feel fear fully and act from choice anyway. The person who has practiced this, who has sat inside their own discomfort and emerged intact, is the person no one can manipulate, because there is nothing left to threaten. You started this video watching two people enter a room. One spoke first, spoke loudest, filled every silence with proof of their importance. The other said nothing, observed, waited, and when they finally spoke, the room leaned in. Now you understand the difference between them at a level most people will never reach. The first person was controlled by ego. Every word was a defense. Every gesture was a negotiation for status. They were not powerful. They were performing power, and the performance required an audience that could be taken away at any moment. The second person had done the work. They had studied the fracture lines, in others and in themselves. They had practiced stillness until it became natural. They had built competence without needing applause. They had exposed themselves to their own triggers until those triggers lost their teeth. They were not manipulating the room. They had simply become someone the room could not ignore. That is the real lesson hidden inside every dark law, every Machiavellian strategy, every method of ego destruction you learned today. The goal was never to destroy someone else. The goal was always to build yourself into someone who cannot be destroyed, not armored, not cold, not detached from the world, but rooted so deeply in your own foundation that the storms other people create pass through you without leaving damage. That is sovereignty. That is what Machiavelli actually meant by power, and it has been waiting for you, not in the tactics, not in the strategies, but in the willingness to turn every single one of them inward and do the work on yourself first. The 7 methods are mirrors. What you see in them is your choice. And this is where most people stop. They learn the 7 methods, they understand the psychology, they nod along, feeling the thrill of secret knowledge, and then they go back to the same patterns, the same reactions, the same ego-driven spirals they were living in before they pressed play. Because understanding is not transformation. Knowing the map is not the same as walking the terrain. The distance between insight and integration is measured in discomfort. It is measured in the moments you choose to pause when every instinct screams at you to react. So let this section be the one that separates you from every other viewer who watched a video about dark psychology and did nothing with it. The mirror is not pointed outward anymore. It is pointed at you. And the question is not whether you can see your reflection. The question is whether you can hold your gaze long enough to let it change you. Every method you learn today has a shadow application and a sovereign application. Silence can be a weapon, or it can be a practice. Strategic withdrawal can be manipulation, or it can be self-respect. Emotional composure can be a mask, or it can be genuine inner stability. The difference is not in the technique. The difference is in the person using it. If you use these methods to control others while your own ego remains unexamined, you have learned nothing. You have simply added more sophisticated armor to the same fragile structure underneath. But if you use them to dismantle your own reactivity, to build genuine composure, to become someone whose stillness comes from depth rather than performance, then you have done what Machiavelli himself rarely discussed in public. You have turned strategy into character. Tomorrow morning you will wake up and the world will test you. Someone will say something that hooks your ego. Someone will dismiss you. Someone will try to provoke a reaction because your reaction is what feeds their sense of control. And in that moment, you will have a choice you did not have before you watched this video. You can react and hand them exactly what they wanted, or you can pause, breathe. Let the silence do what silence does. Not because you are performing composure, not because you memorized a tactic, but because you have begun to understand, at a level deeper than words, that your attention is the most valuable currency you possess, and you no longer spend it on people who have not earned it. That pause will feel unnatural at first. Your body will want to speak. Your mind will manufacture justifications for why this time is different, why this person deserves a response, why silence would be rude or weak. Let those thoughts arrive. Let them pass. They are the old programming running its final cycles. The new pattern begins the moment you choose not to obey the impulse. Not once, but repeatedly, day after day, until the pause becomes your default and the reaction becomes the exception. This is not a weekend project. This is the work of a lifetime, and it starts with a single moment of chosen stillness. There are 2 kinds of people who will finish this video. The first kind will feel a rush of intellectual excitement. They will think about who in their life they want to use these methods on. They will imagine the satisfaction of watching someone else's ego crumble, and within a week, they will have forgotten everything they heard today, because the ego they wanted to destroy was never the real target. The second kind will feel something quieter, something harder to name, a recognition that the 7 methods were never really about other people, that the ego most worth examining is the one they have been protecting their entire life, that the real dark law, the one Machiavelli understood but rarely stated, is that power over others means nothing if you remain a prisoner of your own reactivity. The second kind of person does not need to destroy anyone's ego. They are too busy building something inside themselves that no external force can touch. And that, quietly, without fanfare, without applause, is the most dangerous thing a person can become. Not dangerous because they harm others, dangerous because they can no longer be harmed. Machiavelli wrote about princes and wars and the mechanics of political survival. But beneath every strategy, beneath every calculation, there was a single principle he returned to again and again. The one who controls themselves controls the outcome. Not the one who speaks loudest, not the one with the most allies, not the one who strikes first, the one who has mastered the space between stimulus and response, the one who can sit in silence without needing to fill it, the one who can be misunderstood without rushing to correct the record. That is the eighth law, the one that was never written down, the one you had to discover by walking through the other seven and realizing they all pointed in the same direction. Inward. Every ego you will ever need to master is your own. Every power dynamic you will ever need to shift begins inside you. Every silence that changes a room starts with the silence you cultivate within yourself. You did not come to this video to learn how to destroy someone else. You came because something in you already knew. You are ready to stop being destroyed by your own reactions. And now you know how to begin. If you want to continue building this, subscribe. We go this deep every single time. The eighth law was never written because it can only be lived. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one.